Good morning, 5th grade. Today we're going to continue reading in our Homer P. Fig text, but for Play Posit today we have an article about the Battle of Chancellorsville. And Homer mentioned this battle yesterday in chapter 26, and it's going to come up in chapter 25. It's going to come up again in our reading today. So we want to know just a little bit more about the battle and why it was so important. But before we get started, you have a quick write. It says, what would the United States have been like if the Confederacy had won the Civil War? So you need to think about, why was the Confederacy fighting? What did the Confederacy want out of the Civil War? And how would the United States be different? Press pause to write down your answer and play when you're ready for the focus question. It says, how has the Civil War impacted Homer's journey? Our vocabulary words for today are treason. That's when you betray your country. Maybe you give government secrets to another country that will help them take over that country. Maybe you go against the government. And so we draw a line to this picture. It's about how it's when South Carolina seceded from the Union, and this northern newspaper was saying that they committed treason because they killed members of the U.S. Army. The next one is emblem, and that is a heroic symbol. So an emblem of the United States could be the flag or the bald eagle. This Superman symbol is an emblem for Superman, superhero. The next word is distressed, and that's when you are overwhelmed with anxiety, sorrow, or pain. You can draw a line to this picture. All right, make sure you have your text out, the Battle of Chancellorsville. And because this text is nonfiction, it's going to give us information about the battle. We want to ask a how or why question about the title. And so my how or why question is, why was the Battle of Chancellorsville important? And we're going to write that down in box 1A. Press pause to write down your answer and play when you're ready to read. And oftentimes you will find the main idea of a passage in the introduction. And so we have our introduction right here under the title. I put it in brackets. And as we read it, we're going to look for our answer to this question. Why was this battle so important? The Battle of Chancellorsville was a major Civil War battle that took place near the small town of Chancellorsville, Virginia. The South defeated the North despite having a much smaller army due to the superior tactics of Confederate General Robert E. Lee. All right, and so we know that this battle was important because Robert E. Lee won even though he had a smaller army, but it wasn't about, he was just able to use his men better than the Union general. So for our main idea in 1B, we would write, the Battle of Chancellorsville was important because Robert E. Lee used superior tactics to defeat the Union Army, even though he had less men than the Union Army. All right, so press pause to write down your answer and play when you're ready to keep reading. I'm going to go to this section that says who were the commanders, because in box 2 we want to know who were the Confederate commanders in the battle and who were the Union leaders in the battle. It says the Confederate Army was led by General Robert E. Lee, commander of the Army of Northern Virginia. Other Confederate commanders included Stonewall Jackson, A.P. Hill, and Jeb Stuart. The Union Army was led by General Joseph Hooker, who had been recently appointed commander of the Army of the Potomac. Other Union commanders included George Stoneman, Oliver Howard, and George Meade. And so in box 2, in the first part of box 2, we will write the Confederate commanders. And it says the commanders of the Confederate Army were Robert E. Lee, Stonewall Jackson, A.P. Hill, and Jeb Stuart. You can press pause to write down the first part of box 2 and play when you're ready for the second part. And for the Union commanders in the second set of lines, we would write the commanders of the Union Army were General Joseph Hooker, George Stoneman, Oliver Howard, and George Meade. Press pause to write down your answer and play when you're ready for box 3. I'm at the section titled Before the Battle. General Robert E. Lee's army was dug into the hills near Fredericksburg, Virginia. He was guarding the way to the Confederate capital of Richmond. Union General Joseph Hooker put together a plan to attack Lee and force him to retreat. He would take part of his army and sneak up on Lee from the side, while the rest of his army kept Lee busy from the front. Hooker felt sure of his plan and victory. He had an overwhelming force of 130,000 Union soldiers, and Lee only had 60,000 Confederates. All right, so we'll stop right there. It says, how did General Hooker plan to attack Lee's army in Virginia? And if I go back in the text, it says he put together a plan of attack. That doesn't tell me what his plan is. I need to keep reading. It says he would take part of his army and sneak up on Lee from the side, while the rest of his army kept Lee busy from the front. Okay, so he was going to split up his army and use it as a distraction while he attacked him from the side. So in box 3A, we would write, General Hooker divided up his army into 2 groups. One group would distract Lee's men and attack from the front. Another group would surprise attack Lee's men from the side. Press pause to write down your answer and play when you're ready for box 3B. It says, why was General Hooker confident about his plan of attack? And if we keep reading, it says he felt sure of his plan and victory, but that doesn't tell me why. I need to keep reading. It says he had an overwhelming force of 130,000 Union soldiers, and Lee only had 60,000 Confederates. So he was confident because he had over twice as many men as Lee. So in box 3B, we would write General Hooker was confident about his plan of attack because he had 130,000 men and General Lee only had 60,000 men. Press pause to write down your answer and play when you're ready for box 4. We're going to keep reading the section entitled The Battle. The battle started out on April 30th, 1863, as Union General Hooker had planned. He led a large number of troops to the side of the Confederate army. He had them trapped. Surely Robert E. Lee would retreat. Then things started to go wrong. Instead of retreating, Lee attacked Hooker's army at Chancellorsville. The Confederate army quickly split into 2 forces. Lee sent half of his soldiers, led by General Stonewall Jackson, to attack Hooker's army from the side. The Confederates continued to attack over the next several days. General Lee constantly maneuvered his fewer forces to keep them from getting overwhelmed by the Union Army. After several days of fighting, the Union Army was forced to retreat on May 7, 1863. The battle was over and the Confederates had won. So let's go to 4A. It says, how did Lee respond to Hooker's attack? And if we go back in the text, it says that Lee was trapped, and we want to know what did he do once he was trapped? And instead of retreating, he split up his army into 2 forces. He sent one force to attack from the side, and he maneuvered his other force so that he kept moving their position so they wouldn't get overwhelmed. So in box 4A, we would write, Lee split up his army into 2 groups to attack Hooker's army. Additionally, Lee kept maneuvering his army so that they wouldn't get overwhelmed by the large number of Union soldiers. Press pause to write down your answer and play when you're ready to keep reading. We're at the section entitled Results. The Confederates won the battle. Despite having fewer than half the number of soldiers, they did not have to retreat, and they had inflicted 17,000 casualties on the Union while suffering 13,000 of their own. Even though they had won the battle, the Confederate Army was considered weakened. They lost 13,000 of their 60,000 men, which was a large percentage of their soldiers. They also lost one of their best generals when Stonewall Jackson was accidentally shot by his own men. Box 4B says, what was the result of the battle? And so we know that the Confederates won, but they lost a significant percentage of their men. We also know that the Union lost more men than the Confederates. So in box 4B, we would write, the Confederates won the battle, but they lost a significant portion of their men. The Union lost the battle, and they lost 17,000 soldiers. Press pause to write down your answer and play when you're ready for the paragraph. It says, how did General Lee win the Battle of Charlottesville? And in order to answer this question, you'll need to use your answers from boxes 3A and 3B, 3A, 3B, 4A, okay, 4B. In a good conclusion, you could end with your main idea. That would be a really great conclusion.